I'm going to do this video mostly as a kind of here's how it works, so I'll remember going when I come back to this. This is for a MIDI keyboard I'm working on. I'm trying to work on MIDI and sequencers inside of Unreal Engine 5 as part of my Beatblocks project. I went and bought a keyboard off the marketplace, and it's this virtual MIDI keyboard, and it was a good starting point for me. And they had various versions of it, and the latest version kind of works with the C5. With Unreal 5. It is it's got a great mesh. With each one of the keys are independent and they're animated, and so I'm glad that from that perspective, I could really use that. So that was already programmed in. And this was originally built to visualize MIDI notes being played inside of Unreal Engine. And what it is, if I look at the actual MIDI blueprint, it is right over here. I copied it, the one you see here, and created one called BP Mojo Midi keyboard. And I made a bunch of modifications to it, and I will continue to make modifications on it. But I certainly like the weighted key, or the key action as it shows up, listening to MIDI notes being played. So basically, each MIDI note is tied to a sound source, and each sound source then, for example, if I look at the B2 thing, the B2 sound, it is tied to a key, or a D3 there, a B2. It's tied to a key, and that key has an audio source B2 assigned to it, and then I point it to it used to be pointed to, they all used to be pointed in the original version of this that I got. They pointed to a single meta sound that basically played a simple sine wave. So it just sounded kind of like a toy. But I'm trying to go tie them to my meta sounds that I am using, what are called sound fonts that I did a lot of work on before for Sonic Pi. What those amount to is they are actual musical instruments, and I've got a bunch of them defined. And what each one of those are, let me talk about that. First of all, let's talk about the sound font. Here's my documentation on sound fonts out in a wiki, out on in HackSpy, which is the name of my GitHub project that I did this in. And basically what it does is every note is defined in terms of the sample to use, and then not every note's got a sample. Let's part it all. Like if it's a piano, what they'll do is you'll use a sample, and then you use, if you want to, and let's say there's a sample that they took of the C4, so on the piano, the fourth octave up C, they got a sample, and it was called Bright Piano C4, and what they do is the sound font tells you how to adjust that to make it play a C sharp or a D. So for example, C4 is a sixth note, MIDI note 60, but a D is a MIDI note 62. And it says if you're going to play a D2, you use the C4 sample, not the D. There's not a D4 sample. You use a C4 sample. And in this case, it says multiply it by 1.22, the pitch. You shift the pitch. What I do is I've written it, so I've rewritten, I've taken this data and massaged it a bit so that I have a spreadsheet that does it. I basically copied the sound font, read the sound font into the spreadsheet, and then I use the spreadsheet to send into into data tables. And if I was to go look at that, I would say, like if I look at the D sharp here, the D here is note 62. I just tell it instead of multiply or shift it by a percentage, like 1.03, I say raise it 2 semitones, and a semitone is a step on a scale. So like from C to C sharp is 1 semitone, from C to D is 2 semitones, and so on. So basically, and I've got that inside of my Metasound program. So the Metasound is here. It's pretty complicated. A lot of help from, or at least the initial idea came from, I asked the sound effects guy, and he kind of gave me a starting point. And so if you look at it here, if you ever want to go out there and talk to a guy that knows a lot about Metasounds, an Unreal Engine, it's a sound effects guy. I got a YouTube channel. Basically what I have for inputs to this Metasound is it looks to say it passes in a number of things. It passes in the information that you just saw in the from the that spreadsheet. So it passes in sound font information. It passes in the wave to use. So in this case, it would passed in, the C4 wave, and that's a wave, and that wave is in my. If I go find it, I can go find that. I brought that into. Single note instruments. Here they are. Here's the notes that you saw. So I could find bright piano C4 is a note here. Bright piano C4. There it is, and I could play it, and that's what it sounds like by itself. So what it does is this says, bring in that wave file, and it assigns that to a wave player, and then it says, okay, if it was a C4, it would say, that you should play the C4, because it would say play the C4, so it would pass in the C4, and it would pass in a pitch shift. And where it gets a pitch shift from is the second column, so it would pass in a 2 if I was trying to play a D. It would say play a C4 thing, but raise it 2 semitones, and the wave player does that for me. So it looks for pressed. So if I'm doing a keyboard, and you'll see some other things, I've got a version of this where if you click on a cube, it sends a pressed note. Let me show you that. I mean, if you go, they're the ones down here below. So I've got this set up so if I click on a cube, it will send a note, and it sends C, D, E, F, G. It sends like C4, D4, E4, and so on. So it goes like, whoops, I need to play the game. Sorry, I tried to do it in the editor. So that's sending that pressed to that Metasound. Now, in the case of MIDI, what sends it is the MIDI on. So if there's a MIDI note, a MIDI on note message, it says send a press message to this Metasound, and then releasing the note. Now releasing in what I showed you in the little example there is when I let up on the left mouse button. When we press the left mouse button on the cube, it sent a press message. If you let up on the mouse button, it sent a release message. So, and what do I use those for? Well, the way the Metasound really works is it's got the concept again. If you look in here, it's got the concept of here is a sample, and let's just take the C4 or C2 sample here. And it says the sample size is 51,070 frames, or that's actually a number of sample points in the sample, how many times that it sampled the sound. So there's 51,000 specific points of the sound, and tells you the length. It tells you the idea of sustain loops. And so that is if you press a piano button, or if you press a piano down, and you keep it down, what happens is it plays an attack portion of the wave. It plays the first part, and then what it does is it basically plays the same part over and over and over. It sustains the middle part of the loop, so it'll keep playing a series of frames until you release the key, and then it plays the tail or the end of the sound. So if you look at a sound, well, let's go look at that. Now here we go. If you look at sound wave, so it would do, for example, here's a good example here. It would play the beginning of the sound wave, and then it's got a loop start in there, and it plays the loop start. In this case, the loop start and loop end are so close together it looks like they're the same. But it basically, there would be a loop start. So let's just say, for instance, you think the loop end is right here. It goes ahead and it'll play the loop start. It'll play the beginning of the wave, and then if you're holding the key down, it plays a loop start to the loop end portion of the wave over and over and over and over until you release the key, and then it plays the tail end of the wave. So that's kind of a cool way to fake a sustain. I mean, that's basically kind of what is going on with the musical instrument. Now, if I look at that, let's go back here. So what happens is I pass all that information about, how long is it, how many frames is it, so it's like a 51,000 some. I pass where does the sustain loop start, right here. Where does the sustain loop end? How long is the sustain loop? What's the sample rate, and so on. And all that is used to calculate, basically, to play the three parts of the wave. So the first part here plays the beginning of the wave. So it plays from the beginning of the wave to where the sustain loop starts. The second part plays the looping portion, and it shows here it's looping, so it plays that middle portion over and over and over until a release event is triggered, which is either, the left mouse button comes out in the case of the cues we saw, or if it's a MIDI playing, a MIDI note off has been received for the note in question, and it'll stop playing that, and then after that, it will play the end of the wave, basically from the sustain end to the end of the wave, and it mixes it back here in the mono mixer. So that's what's going on inside of it. Again, this is mostly to remind myself how clever or not clever I was. Depends how this will all work out. And so what happens then is, so that this is the guts. This is like a sound cue, except it's a very complicated, it manipulates a sound wave file and makes it a musical instrument note being played and being released. Like I said, I fed all the spreadsheet into a data table, and the data table gets read into an array, and that array gets used in the blueprint that drives this whole thing. So basically, it sends the information on when the start wave is, and again, the start, if you noticed on the spreadsheet, it's different based on the sample. A C3 is a different length than the F3. It's got a different start point on the where you should loop the. If you're trying to loop, where you should start and sustain end on the loop, and the middle, and so on. They're all different. Every wave is different. Every wave file is different. But so it does all that stuff and plays the note theoretically, and it passes information to when to shift it. And if I look at my keyboard here, right here. Basically, what's happening is this is their original one. Like I said, and the original one passed in, just basically called their little meta sound, which where was it? Oh, right here, where it just went ahead and said, hey, just play this frequency, and just release the frequency. So just played a sine wave. So I replaced that. This is my code that I interject into it. So what happens here is it. Goes in there and it passes the parameters that it reads from the array file, which is called instrument array. Gets a sample, knowing which note is being played, and it's note 72, which is a C, C3, I believe, or C4. then it goes ahead and it sets these parameters inside of that meta sound we saw, and plays it. And if it's another one coming in, it plays a different one. Another note, the next note. And so that's what's happening. Now, just from the MIDI perspective, I'll just show that real quick. I need the event here. Construction script. No, I need the event. So, if I event graph, let's look at the event graph. So it does, here's the event graph, and it says, this is for the MIDI player. It goes in there, and I got a bunch of notes in here, and it does a bunch of stuff. It sets up the colors, and you can do some other things with changing the number of octaves on the keyboard dramatically. But I basically go out and find out all the MIDI devices, and then it goes and says, it goes and does a setup of the MIDI input. So you got a bunch of messages. It basically goes to it finds, it listens for a channel, a MIDI channel, and it also can output to a MIDI channel as well. So if I look at what that does in terms of the game here, when you go place, the keyboard is just, I'd pick it and I'd stick it into a scene. The only thing I have to do to make it work is I do have to say which MIDI channels to listen to. So I'm saying my MIDI input device is a 1, and then the output device is a 5. And I'm using Loop MIDI to get the data in, and here's Loop MIDI. So basically I use this as kind of a hub, and I send the message into Loop MIDI, and then the software here, the Unreal Engine, listens to the MIDI loop to get it to work. So if I look at playing it, I'll just show this here. This is Amazing Grace, and it's just here's a piano roll. Here's the MIDI notes being played on it. So if I go back to here, wherever I go back to, and if I could go play it, and it should play over here. So if I go look here, I'm going to start it playing, and this is a MIDI player. And what it's doing is it's sending the MIDI notes not to a synthesizer inside of my PC, but it's sending it to Unreal Engine. And this is running on my PC, but it's sending it to Unreal Engine, and then Unreal Engine is playing the note using what you saw there from my MIDI keyboard, because the MIDI keyboard is set up to listen to a single MIDI channel that I'm now pointing this to, and I'm sending it to from this Band in the Box MIDI player here. I'm sending it from there to the loop channel in Loop MIDI 1, and then from there it goes to this is listening to Loop MIDI 1, which happens to be the device 1 that I've set this up to listen for. And so that should be it. So if I play it, I'm going to go ahead and start it. Does nothing. And now I'm going to start. I'm going to play my MIDI player here, and it's going to be sending the messages over MIDI. And we should be able to see the keyboard hopefully work. Yeah, if it all works, we'll see. Got a few little problems, obviously, but I'm going to try playing it again. See, it's stuck on a key, which is weird. I notice it's not playing the C6, and that's why the song doesn't sound right. So I look into why C6 doesn't seem to play. So if you notice that, what would happen is it would show up here, but the MIDI note didn't seem to find it. So I must have something set up wrong with that. But that's pretty much a rundown on that. This will help me at least remember where to go look for things.